on my computer. Okay, so everyone, welcome to our first webinar this semester. We've been having our teachers lounges to talk about various pedagogical issues, and this webinar has been scheduled originally for March, but then you know what happened and we had to reschedule, but we are happy that things come down a little bit, Ben, on in your dean's world.
Well, at least we're coming up on final exam and winter break, so
Right.
there's at least that.
But please welcome Benjamin Rifkin, the dean at Hofstra University's College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, our famous Russian language professor, textbook author, scholar, вдохновитель, inspirer, and a mentor for many of us. Ben's most recent publication that he co-authored with Colleen Lucy and Benjamin Jens on oral histories has appeared in The Art of Teaching Russian that I'm gonna shamelessly promote. It's finally out and it's available on Amazon. It includes 19 wonderful chapters on various issues of devoted to Russian language pedagogy. So we're very happy the book is here, and then we are grateful to Ben and his co-authors for submitting and contributing to this volume. But today we're going to talk about liberal arts goals and how they can help us frame the curriculum for language curriculum. So Ben will lead this webinar, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions via chat, and we'll have a discussion at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to everyone who registered to this webinar, and it'll also be available on YouTube sometime later, maybe a few months later. So just give you a warning. So if you want to turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen in the recording, it'll be available to the general public. All right, but now please welcome Ben Rifkin.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, I think that the people who are participating, their video won't be on YouTube. It is? I thought it would just be whoever's speaking.
I'm not sure, but
Okay. All right. So everybody keep your clothes on. Okay. So when I first proposed the possibility of this webinar to ACTR, it was in response to a particular crisis in the world languages field, which has since grown significantly worse. So I just want to start by saying that I have revised my presentation to address the more current realities. And I want to point out that the subtitle of my presentation today, the webinar, is "What Good is a Road That Doesn't Lead to a Church?" And for many of us in the Russian field, that line rings from a Georgian film, Repentance, where a pilgrim is asking this rhetorical question near the end of the film. And I'm going to come back to this topic throughout my presentation. First I started, when I was originally thinking about this, about a news story that appeared about a year ago about a tremendous decline in the number of world language programs in the country as monitored by the Modern Language Association. And this is an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, as you see, from January of 2019. To the period of 2009 to 2013, one program was cut. But from 2013 to 2016, it was 651. And it's getting worse. We are a profession, a field, and I speak now about world languages generally, at risk, and we need to understand that. One of the contributing factors to this is that the demographic trends in the United States are leading to lower enrollments in higher education, as you can see in the chart on the slide here. We're not going to see the numbers of students graduating from high school go up again until about 2030. Experts in the admissions field refer to this as the birth dearth. Under other circumstances, in a birth dearth, countries tend to reduce barriers to immigration and increase the number of immigrants coming with their children and who will go to school and go to college and be contributing and productive members of our economy. That has not been what's been going on in our country for the last 4 years. So we don't have a significant population of immigrants to balance out the fact that we have the birth dearth in many regions of the country for the decade that we're beginning now. As a dean, I tell you that when we have to cut budgets, deans, provosts, and presidents look for the lowest hanging fruit. And it's our job as world language educators to make our programs so vibrant that they're not the low-hanging fruit. That's very important. And I'm going to be talking today about how to move our wonderful, tasty, nutritious fruit, okay, I'm done with this metaphor, up to a higher branch of the tree. Because in a tight budget, the lowest hanging fruit is what gets picked. Now, I want to share with you something to contextualize something for us to think about with regard to language acquisition. This is a chart out of an article that I published in 2005 about the language learning outcomes for Russian based on the proficiency scale, correlated with numbers of classroom hours of instruction. I could have used any numbers to identify the major proficiency levels according to the ACTR scale. And the numbers I wound up choosing do not reflect the difficulty, the comparative difficulty of moving from novice to intermediate, which would be 0 up to 3 on this scale, and intermediate to advanced, which would be from 3 to 7. But the fact of the matter is that we just have no way in most situations in colleges and universities to get our students to advanced level proficiency, which is the minimum working proficiency, with the number of hours that we have at our disposal in a liberal arts curriculum. So the average number of hours in a Russian major, for example, around the country, actually that's any world language major, not just Russian major, is between 400 and 450. And if you look at where that gets you, that's solid intermediate mid in all of the modalities, according to my research. And my research has, although it came out 15 years ago, has only been confirmed in subsequent projects. So nobody has come up with anything better. There are programs that have better results, but they also have more hours. And they may also have more study abroad built in, because this does not include the hours on study abroad. And we also know, and this is one of my favorite presentations by one of our attendees today, Dan Davidson, gave a presentation at an ACTR conference many years ago. And the title was "When Being There Is Not Enough." And his presentation was all about the fact that students can go on study abroad and spend all their time speaking in English with other Americans or with Russians, and not make significant gain in their language skills. So just being in Russia or being in the target culture is not enough. One has to actually engage with native speakers in the target language while on study abroad. So we have a ceiling. I had in the article that I published in 2005 that this is taken from, I hypothesized that the ceiling might be higher in a Romance or Germanic language. But my colleagues in Romance and Germanic languages who are OPI trainers told me that in their experience, it's intermediate, mid, intermediate, high is the ceiling, even for their languages with 4 years of college language study and no study abroad. So the ceiling may be conceptual. And here I'll just compare and say that, one little note about superior level proficiency is the ability to, includes the ability to hypothesize. And when I was being trained as a tester by Irene Thompson, one of the authors of the first version of the proficiency guidelines, I questioned her about the placement of hypothesis in the superior level, because for those of you who are not Russian teachers, or for those of you who haven't thought about it, the subjunctive in Russian is grammatically actually quite easy compared to the subjunctive in the Romance languages. And Irene said to me, linguistically, you're right. It shouldn't be so hard. It's just that it's conceptually hard. And the training session, of course, proved her right, that even though it's linguistically easy to create the subjunctive in Russian, it's conceptually difficult, and that's why it's a superior level task in all the languages. So we have significant limits to proficiency gains in a 4-year program without study abroad, without summer immersion. Typically what we find is that a year of classroom instruction, depending on the language, can get students, and we're talking about now around an average of 4 hours a week in class. 1 year of classroom instruction, we can get our students typically to the novice high level, maybe intermediate low for the most talented and dedicated students. Another year of instruction at 3 to 4 hours a week can get most of our students to intermediate low for sure, and maybe a good number of them to intermediate mid. But 2 more years of classroom instruction without summer immersion typically or study abroad, typically doesn't move them up in speaking beyond intermediate mid. In reading, they can advance up to intermediate high and advanced. I'm seeing a message that I'm frozen. Can somebody put in chat if you can see me, if you can hear me? I'm back. Okay, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, you're good.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay, all right. So, what is the long-term value of what we're doing? When I was a student at the Middlebury Russian School, I took a placement test. And one of the items on the placement test had me write out the date in words, and I left out the soft sign in the number 900. So what is the value of that? What's the significance of that? What does that mean in the long term for my ability at that point to be able to say what the date was? And how often do we write out the year 1980 in words in Russian? What's the value when a student recognizes that that Russians are not all Christians, and that Russians who are Christians may celebrate Christmas in January? How valuable is it that a student correctly chooses the case ending for a noun phrase to complete a sentence? What does it mean, and how valuable is it for a student to make an argument that all Russians are homophobic? And what's the value when a student successfully communicates with a native speaker of the target language about their hobbies? My challenge for us as a profession is that we have to think carefully about what we count, because typically we only value what we count. And as a teacher, I know that it's really much easier for me to circle the mistakes in the grammar than it is for me to think about the bigger issues here. But we really need to think about our values and make sure that we're counting them. Sometimes teachers will say that they value certain things, but they're actually counting something else. So it's important to synchronize those things. And so this becomes a dilemma for us in the world languages field. We want to help our students grow linguistically and improve their proficiency to the very highest level possible. But we also want to spend time helping them grow in intercultural competence and grow also in other liberal arts skills. And so which way do we go? One of the things that I, as a dean, cannot give any faculty member in my college is more time with the students. They've got so many credit hours that's correlated with so many classroom hours and so many hours of possible homework assignments, and that's it. And in 4 years, they have to be able to graduate. So in this crisis time, and in addition to the challenges before COVID, now we're seeing even more institutions that are looking to possibly dismantle their language departments in one way or another. There are people who might be very concerned about the name of their department. And I put some names of departments on the side there for you to consider. And I just want to tell you that I just don't think that the name of the department is so important as what it is that we do in our departments. And I'm just going to read the caption for the cartoon here because I'm not sure that it's showing up well on everybody's screen. But along with antimatter and dark matter, we've recently discovered the existence of doesn't matter, which appears to have no effect on the universe whatsoever. So I'm going to argue that the name of our departments really doesn't matter. It's what we do in them that matters. And here, and here comes the big point. We have to be teaching the liberal arts in our language programs. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, there is an association called the Association of American Colleges and Universities. That's its acronym on the right-hand side of your screen, AAC&U. Their website is aacu.org. And they have a wonderful program called Liberal Education and America's Promise. The acronym of that is LEAP, L-E-A-P. And the website to get to LEAP is simply aacu.org/LEAP. And the LEAP program has essential outcomes, some of which are on the left of the screen. I did not include the essential learning outcomes that I thought were less relevant for us in the language field. Those would include scientific reasoning, quantitative literacy. But the ones on the left here, which are the bulk of them, can easily all of them be embedded in our curriculum. And I would argue that they should be. And that's what the rest of this webinar is going to be about, embedding these things in our programs so that students can talk about this as part of their learning experience and part of their career trajectories. So the Liberal Education and America's Promise essential learning outcomes that I listed some of which on the previous screen are supposed to be embedded in the curriculum in a way that's progressively more and more challenging through the curriculum as students move from first year or freshman year to the final year or the senior year. And that, of course, is familiar to us in the language field when we think about what we expect of students in first year Chinese and second year Chinese and third year Chinese and so forth. The work that students do should be anchored with active involvement with diverse communities with real world challenges. And for those of us in the languages field, that feels familiar because of its synergy with the World Readiness Standards for work in communities. And success should be demonstrated with problems in novel settings, unrehearsed. And that's just another way of phrasing what we talk about when we talk about proficiency and proficiency-based assessment and proficiency-based teaching, that students shouldn't be able to get a good grade merely by memorizing. They actually have to create with language in new and novel ways to get their meanings across, their personalized meanings across to their interlocutors. So to help people across the country implement courses and learning tasks that are informed by the LEAP program and the essential learning outcomes, the ACNU convened a group of faculty across disciplines and institutions to come up with a series of rubrics that are called the value rubrics. And value is an acronym, and I have to give it the award as one of the best acronyms ever created. It stands for Valid Assessment of Learning in Undergraduate Education. You know, when I think about some of the acronyms I've come up with, I'm just in awe of this one. So these rubrics have been validated in diverse institutions with diverse student populations, reviewed, revised, validated again, and there's one rubric for each category of work. So if we go back to the list on the left, there's a rubric for each one of those. And you were asked when you registered to download the rubric so you could look at them before the webinar. And if you didn't, Evgeny is going to post a link so you can download them now. You can also get them at any time from AAC&U. You're just asked to provide your name, email address, institutional affiliation. It might look like you're buying something, but the cost is $0. So I've put up here on the screen one rubric as an example. This is the critical thinking rubric. And you can see this, the way that the rubrics work is that the lowest level performance for students is on the right, and the highest level is on the left. And there's another page that goes with the rubric that is definitions of all of these terms. And you can design tasks that have these requirements embedded in them and use this rubric or adapt it to grade your students' work. So these rubrics and the essential learning outcomes of the Liberal Education in America's Promise program are synergistically related with, correspond to the World Readiness Standards. And just to remind some for whom this might not be very familiar, or inform some who may not be familiar with it, the World Readiness Standards is something that you can download from the ACTFL website at actfl.org under publications, and it's free. It's a brief version. There's a book that's got more explanation. There are a couple of standards under communication with communication in different modalities of presentational, interpretive, and interpersonal. Cultures for understanding perspectives, products, and practices. Connections is all about using the language to understand, to access and understand information that would not be available to you in your native language. And so we used to think about this in the context of content-based instruction, right? So for instance, reading about history in German and seeing a German perspective, looking at materials that are not available in English. In comparisons, we have the standards for making comparisons between languages and cultures. You know, so for instance, for me, I never knew how to use the word whom until I studied Russian. And then it was just completely obvious and wonderful to me. And now I'm a big fan of whom, which is a shame because I predict that in 20 years or less, it'll be gone from the language. And then communities is where we have standards for students to actually engage with native speakers or other speakers of the language, whether in person or through means of technology, such as this webinar, in gaming platforms and in Second Life and so forth, and also to set up themselves for lifelong learning, to continue to study the language and culture that they've begun to study in our classes. And we can see that these standards are just synchronized beautifully with the essential learning outcomes. And for those of you who are so inclined to get the book, The Art of Teaching Russian, our chapter on oral history shows the connection between all 5 C's and essential learning outcomes in an oral history learning task in the language curriculum. So here you can see that for some of the liberal arts essential skills or essential learning outcomes from the AAC&U on the one side, and on the other side, the World Readiness Standards. And you can see how each one of those standards opens up opportunities for students to do the things on the right. So the World Readiness Standards actually constitute as a way curricular categories or categories of the content of the tasks that we'll ask students to undertake. And the goals can be found on the right under the essential skills from the LEAP program. And, so why do students, here I have the question of why do students take Russian? Actually, when I asked this question in a research project that was published in the ADFL bulletin a number of years ago, it was actually why do students take a foreign language? Only 6%, this was, the survey was of 1,000 students of about a dozen foreign languages at about 8 or 9 institutions across the country. Forgive me if my numbers aren't exactly accurate, but I can give you the reference to the publication if you want it. You can just email me about that. Only 6% wanted to be teachers. That includes, the people who say they want to read Dostoevsky in the original, which, I would say, based on my experience as an American, doesn't happen till way, way, way after 4th year Russian in college. Chekhov, yes. Dostoevsky, not really. 39% of the students say they want to use the language professionally, but not for teaching. 34% have liberal arts goals. They want to learn about another part of the world. 11% have heritage reasons. And that means that they might have close heritage connection. So they may have been born in the target culture or their parents, or they could have distant heritage connections, such as myself. But for those of us who teach Russian, many of our students who think they have a distant heritage connection might be surprised to find out that their ancestors may have spoken only Yiddish, although they were subjects of the Russian Empire. And 10% of the students who responded had a variety of other reasons. And so here I just want to share with you with my lovely Borscht, the possible design of a major that might correspond more to the interests of students and bring in more students to our majors. So include some introductory linguistics, have 4 to 5 semesters of language in which we count all the credits. Not is a lot of places, a lot of institutions say you have to take 1st year and 2nd year, and then you can count the credits towards the major. Students are very discouraged by that. 2 semesters of culture or literature and translation, 2 semesters of area studies. And if possible, you could ask them to demonstrate that they're using the language for research by looking at newspaper articles. Allow them to count courses taken on study abroad, give them an opportunity of taking a course in which they have community involvement. This is a way to grow enrollments by recognizing that even if we have 8 semesters of language, if they don't go abroad, they're still going to wind up in that intermediate, mid, intermediate, high level. But bringing in more students so that we're making the major better enrolled, which makes it less likely to be cut. In addition, you'll notice that I'm suggesting that we include some introductory linguistics and area studies, which means that our colleagues in other departments are getting our students in their classes, and that makes them also more supportive of our programs. It's really important to build community in our programs, and one of the challenges that we face in the language programs, as well as in some of the sciences and mathematics, is that our programs are highly stratified. I had a really astonishing experience at an ACTR conference. For those of you who don't know, that's the American Association of Teachers of Slavic and East European Languages, a number of years ago when I was talking with a professor of Russian from another university, and we discovered that we were both undergraduates at Yale majoring in Russian at the same time, but he started as a freshman. I started as a sophomore, went to Middlebury over the summer, and then skipped into 4th year. So we never met each other in a Russian class because 1st year students never met 2nd year students, who never met 3rd year students, who never met 4th year students. So I encourage us to think about projects that would bring upper level students into lower level classes for presentations on cultural or other topics, and to have students from different levels work together on a wiki project with different themes. For instance, if you're interested in environment, here's this group, and it's going to include students from first, second, and third year or so forth. Bring students together from different levels to perform together or perform sequentially, karaoke or in a skit. Have a film showing in which the upper level students lead the discussion. That could be in English afterwards, so that everybody feels included. And the upper level students become role models for the lower level students to continue to stay with the course of instruction. And now I'd like to ask for you to take a few moments and work in groups. And the Zoom masters are going to put you into breakout rooms in just a moment. And you'll be in a group with 4 or 5 students. And I'd like you to suggest working together for 4 or 5 minutes. What might be a culture-based public speaking task that you could assign in a language classroom for language learning. And this could be in English at a lower level, it's presentational mode. And it can be in the target language at a higher level. And think about what liberal arts skills are practiced. So you're gonna have 5 minutes. And Irina or Yevgeny, when you're ready, put folks into the breakout rooms.
I'm ready. Everybody will get an invitation on your screen. Including you, Ben, but please
Okay.
stay in the room.
Can you put me?
I couldn't get you out of not sending you an invitation.
Yeah, so I don't know how to get back into it.
Oh, it's okay. Just don't accept the invitation. That's it.
Okay. Okay. So I had said to Evgeny, I thought we would get to this right around 4:30, and I was right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now we have 7 people who are not in a group.
It's strange. Maya, Susan, or maybe they're just waiting for the invitation. Ron, Sophia. Everybody got an invitation. Sophia has not accepted. And Ivan has not accepted.
So it's possible people might have stepped away from the laptop. But I posted something on the chat.
Three and a half minutes.
Participating in the breakout, and I'm just going to ask for 1 or 2 people from different groups. I think we had about maybe 9 or 10 groups to share what you came up with, what you talked about, by just if somebody would unmute themselves and volunteer to go first. So there were 8 groups. All right, I'm going to pick on group 3. Somebody from group 3, step up.
Step up. That means me, I guess, right?
Okay,
No,
all right.
Unfortunately, out of 4 participants, only 2 got a chance to share their experiences, but they're quite similar. It looks like it's a common practice to assign presentations to students. I tend to rely more on English and just suggest, the only requirement that I have is you have to introduce some Russian words relevant to your presentation. So they have to put them on screen and try to say them with students. My colleague spoke about doing a presentation about a famous Russian, but it's all in Russian at the end of the year. which is challenging, but it also, we spoke about different textbooks because, for instance, I switched to Troika several years ago, and there is a whole section, I believe in lesson 4, about famous Russians. So a lot of this material is introduced, during the year.
Right, but in Golosa, that's the final chapter.
Right, I used Golosa for over 10 years, yeah. So same story. But I'm just saying it's a good way. I have to admit that at least in the first year, it's always teacher-centered, in a sense that they prefer to talk to me and are reluctant to speak to each other, especially in the target language. And I assign them in small groups and try to make them speak, but it's always a challenge.
Okay, well, there are strategies about that, but that's for another time. But I think that, the thing that's, most important about the presentation strategies that you shared from your group is that you're already doing them, and that this is something that we can think about putting into our syllabus and helping our students articulate that they're getting experience with public speaking in their language class. This is, part of the language learning experience is to give presentations. So let's go on now to the next breakout room. And this is going to be a critical thinking language learning task. So now I'm going to ask you, and you'll go into new groups, and there may be some familiar faces in them, and there may not be, because it'll be Zoom randomness again, to think about what is the language proficiency level and goal? What are the modalities that you're working with? Listening, speaking, reading, writing, interpretive, presentational, interpretive, and the liberal arts skill practice is critical thinking. How is that going to be engaged in the language learning class? So please join the breakout room that you see appearing on the screen, and I will randomly call on a breakout room to speak. Ready to return from the breakout rooms. Some people are taking advantage of their last 30 seconds.
Can I say something?
Sure.
So I think before we go to the these rooms, it would be nice to give a chance or just remind all people to make some notes what questions are, because we cannot see them when we are in the breaking room.
Okay.
And we keep forgetting what we have to discuss, because if it's one question, it's one thing. But when you have several it just doesn't keep in the mind, because we have to listen to you and then we have to look at the screen. It just doesn't go together.
Thank you, Irina. And we're going to do one more breakout room, and I will make sure to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Yevgeny, are we all back from breakout rooms?
We are.
Okay. So can I ask for somebody from one of the breakout rooms to talk about what you came up with?
I can say probably it's a break room 5, and I was appointed by my comrades to speak. So
okay.
So I just done a project with my heritage class, heritage speakers. They did a project on comparing two systems of education here and in Russia and surrounding countries. So they spoke with their relatives who were studying there, and then compared this to American system, and then presented. So they did an interview and presented it in class, and they had to kind of first discuss and say what their relatives think about the difference, and then just say what they think about it, express some view. So it was a kind of this project-based learning, and also forced them to think about it. And
absolutely.
And we were also thinking, speaking about doing all kinds of reviews or book reviews, film reviews, but of course all of this is possible starting from intermediate level and up, because I just don't know how you can do it with beginners only in English, but in
English. In English. Right, and and that's one way to keep them interested, is to do some work where they're thinking critically about the culture in English. I want to point out, and thank you, Katja, for volunteering, that the project you describe is highly integrative in terms of it's using multiple modalities, right? The students who are doing this project, they're speaking with someone, they're listening, they're taking notes, they're thinking about it, they're writing a presentation, they're preparing a presentation. That's all wonderful language stuff. But they're also doing things that are on the essential learning outcomes under critical thinking, where they are comparing two systems, they are evaluating, they are using evidence to make their point about what aspects of each system they like best. And again, I think that many of us in the language fields are doing projects like this, but we may not be describing them in our syllabi so that students and others can understand that they are getting a liberal arts education through language. Now we're going to do one more. It's the last one of these. And this is critically important, and it's about information literacy. So here, and Irina, thank you for the suggestion. I will say again, you're going to go into breakout rooms, and you may see some familiar faces or not, and come up with an activity that involves language learning with some language information literacy. I'm sorry, not language information, but information literacy, where students have to make judgments about the validity and the reliability of information they find on the web. Okay, so language learning and information literacy, those are the two things to think about. Breakout rooms are about to start. Hi, everyone, we're coming back. And if you could just give me a thumbs up, Hannah Waba, that you can see my PowerPoint.
No.
Okay, so I need to share the screen again. Okay, now is it good?
Yes.
Okay, so Hannah, while I've got you, can you tell us about what your group talked about with regard to literacy?
Yes, well, this is very interesting. We talked about the importance of giving the students an opportunity to explore different websites, different opinions, different authors' perspectives from different resources. It's very important for them to check different resources, but they have to check authors' credibility. They have to make sure that this is a very valid and important information, and it's an accurate information. And once they are checking that and they are sure that they choose the right resources, then students, they can not just, it's important for them to summarize and paraphrase what the author is saying, so we can check their comprehension, but at the same time, which is I'm a big fan of critiquing. It's very important for the students to critique, to reflect on the author's perspectives, and then they can also relate to their personal experiences. So they can share their opinions and thoughts and about how can they reflect on that, whether they agree or disagree with the author's opinions and perspectives, and they can also share their opinions with others among their classmates and professors.
Well, that's great. And what you've done is you've laid out a project in which that starts with information literacy, proceeds through critical thinking, and moves on to personalization and creative work. And that's terrific. What I want to encourage all world language instructors is to think about embedding information literacy in their projects and explicitly identifying it as such, so that students understand that this is one of the things they're learning in their world language class. Because it's important for students to know what they're learning to be able to share that value. And I'm going to be talking about that some more now. We're not going to be having any more breakout rooms now. So thank you for bearing with me on that. So, as you design courses, I really encourage you to think not only about the language and culture content, but also the liberal arts skills and the students' career trajectories. What are the skills from the essential learning outcomes in that liberal education and America's Promise program that your students will need to build their career trajectories, whether they go to grad or professional school right after college, or whether they go right into a job? And remember what I said earlier, that only 6% of our students, roughly, are interested in following in our footsteps to become teachers, to go on for a graduate degree in a language, to become a language teacher. So it's important for us to help students learn, understand how what they're learning connects to their lives, not only in the sense of broadening their understanding of another culture, but the skills that they're learning in the liberal arts. And in order to do that, you need to make that explicit in the task that you give the students and in the rubric that they're going to be graded. And that allows you to provide meaningful feedback. So for instance, if you're having students give an oral presentation, whether it's in the target language or in English, one of the components of the rubric could be speaking clearly and with sufficient volume. And if it's not there, then they haven't learned how to do that. And that's an important skill for them for their lives, and their careers. So put that into the rubric, and that gives you the framework to give your students feedback on that topic. It also helps them understand what it is you're valuing because they see you're counting it. I encourage you to think about SMART assessments when you're developing your rubric. And SMART is a thing in the assessment field. That's an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, so that there's a deadline when the work is completed. And we're used to thinking about our learning goals with regard to language, but I also want you to consider embedding into your learning goals those larger liberal art goals, even when you're teaching the language class itself. So it may be more, for some of us, it may be more natural to include those liberal arts goals in a literature class or a culture class, but also to include those liberal arts goals in the language classes as well, and to explicitly identify them so that students know. To have periodic experiences where students perform together and you invite community members, and maybe they will share the stage with students when that's possible, to engage community members at these events, connect community members to the students, have public celebrations, and someday that will be possible again, maybe as early as the fall semester. That's another way to raise the visibility of your program and to make your program cool and exciting, because the students who perform at a poetry reading night or a karaoke night or a skit night or a game night will be, asking their friends to come. And then their friends are going to say, I want to take that class. That class looks like fun. And especially for those institutions that have native target culture native speakers in the community who can come, this is a great opportunity to engage the community. These are ways to make your programs vibrant, and that's the way that they develop deep roots so that they're less likely to be cut. The students achieve a large array of outcomes that are not only language-based, the students are able to articulate those outcomes themselves. They can say, not only did I learn Japanese, but I also learned how to think critically, or how to write an essay, even though I learned how to write an essay in German. The students become your recruiters and your alumni fans. And by bringing the community into the events, the community also recognizes your outcomes. That may bring in some donor money for scholarships or for other events, and deans and provosts and presidents like that too. The deeper the roots, the higher the fruit, the less likely you are to be plucked. If you combine majors to have multiple languages together in a language major, where you have to take 5 semesters or 6 semesters of a language, and then you have to take related area studies and some linguistics, then people may be counting the numbers of students in the major as an aggregate and not by the language that's the track within. This is a way to help increase the numbers so that when people are looking at numbers, the numbers are stronger. We have constraints. As a dean, I have a very significant budget constraint. At my institution, we had fewer students this year than we were hoping for because of the pandemic. Every faculty deferred a salary increase. Secretaries got furloughed 1 day a week. Administrators took about a 12% salary cut. And numerous programs were cut. There were some, not many layoffs, but some. And we are not at all we are actually in a good situation compared to many other institutions. So we need to accept that deans and provosts for a while are going to be working with reduced budgets, and we'll be looking for low-hanging fruit. And not every dean is a language person who wants to try and preserve language at all costs. The other thing I'll say is that many deans, provosts, and presidents who aren't language people themselves may have had unpleasant experiences studying language when they were in college and high school. So they might not have a great love for us. I'm very excited that our new president coming in is majored in classics in college, so woohoo for that. But so among the constraints, we have to recognize that we have a reality of proficiency ceilings. For those of our students who are not heritage learners, for those of our students who are not going on study abroad, there are very real ceilings for what they can achieve. And so we need to think about what impact we can have that includes language and what impact we can have on them that goes beyond language, and that's the liberal arts. So the major should be not only focused on language. We need to collaborate with partners in other departments so that they are happy to have our students and have our students double major with them. If we limit the number of credits, reduce the number of credits in our major to 30 or 33, that makes it easier for our students to double major. And that helps grow our numbers. And we need to do everything we can to foster and celebrate the internal and external accomplishments of students and faculty. Promote on social media. Every event, there should be someone there with a camera. And of course, that could be your phone. But you need to get pictures and you need to get them into social media so that people see that your program is a happening program. This requires stepping beyond the more familiar framework of just teaching language and culture within language. And I say this as somebody who used to be the director of the Russian school at Middlebury in the summer with its famous language pledge. And it was incredibly powerful for me as a student at Middlebury in the summer of 1980, but we are not during the academic year at other institutions operating in a Middlebury context. And we need to have enrollments and help avoid being the low-hanging fruit with all of the different strategies that we can. To that end, we need to embed the liberal arts skills and goals in the curriculum and assess how students meet those goals. Let them know that they're going to be assessed on that. Show them that it counts. Publicize the percentages of students who reach milestones in liberal arts skills, as well as the content goals, so that that's clear to everyone that that's part of your program and that your program is therefore aligned with the college and the university in which it's located. And then our program is on a road that leads to a church. Language and culture become the indispensable center of the liberal arts curriculum. They are landmarks on a linguistic and spiritual journey. And that brings me back to the subtitle of my talk, what good is a road that doesn't lead to a church? So if we are teaching language and culture in such a way that our students grow also in their ability to think critically, become interculturally competent, reason ethically, communicate persuasively in speech and writing, then we have indeed taken them on a linguistic and spiritual journey. So with that concludes the presentation part of the webinar. And now we have 15 minutes for discussion. You can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put a question in chat, and I'll be happy to answer to the best of my knowledge, although it's possible that there could be someone else. Transformational learning is very compelling for students. Daria, you're very right. And to this, in this context, I enthusiastically recommend that everybody think about opportunities to get students engaged with native speakers in the community or through the web, through social media, in terms of the community standard. In some places, it's possible even that with really vibrant communities of native speakers, to have students get an internship in a business owned and run by people who are target culture natives in New York, in Philadelphia and other Boston, other large cities, and undergraduate research and community service, all transformative opportunities. How important has ADFL been in supporting such activities? I find far more support as a world language educator from ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL. And there are some resources available at the ACTFL website, including teaching language through a prism of social justice, for example. Much more available through ACTFL than from ADFL. ADFL is much more focused on the structures of language departments. And thank you, Evgeny, for the call out for Betty Lou Lever and co-authors chapter on transformative language learning and teaching. Very powerful. Other questions?
How do you maximize the use of Russian in classes where they want to just keep lapsing into English?
So for me, what I do is I think about what amount of time do I want to spend on an English language project, and then I set the timer. I set a timer visibly in the room. I like to use a kitchen timer that goes tick, 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 and then brrr, right? The old-fashioned kind. And I say, we're going to spend 15 minutes on this project now. And then we're going to move on to other things that are in the target language. And then the other thing that I do when I'm not doing an English language culture-based or liberal arts-based activity is classes conducted exclusively in Russian, except for the beginning and the end, where I take and answer questions in English. But I make it clear that if you have a question, I expect you to try to ask it in Russian. I demonstrate and I model to students how they can ask questions at the lower levels without knowing advanced grammatical terminology. So for instance, and pardon me, for those of you who are not Russian speakers, we don't for the word noun in Russian is imя существительное. So that's not, not a real easy thing. So I tell my students, look, you don't know how to say noun in Russian in first year Russian, but you can say, is this word like table or is it like to read? So that they can do that. Elizabeth, I hope that's helpful for you.
Yes, thank you.
And I do agree. I didn't mean to slam ADFL. I just wanted to say that I find more resources for the kinds of things that I'm interested in doing at ACTFL than through ADFL. Things that you can download, electronic books, as well as you can order actual books, although I think the actual bookstore is closed now due to the pandemic, but everything is available as a PDF, which is cheaper. And there are some really great essays in the ADFL bulletin. And also for those of you who are or might someday be a department chair, the ADFL runs seminars in the summer for department chairs. I mean, this year it remains to be seen whether they can do it live or well, they'll do it by Zoom, but in the summer to help department chairs. So some of us are sharing that different people have different approaches to using grammar terminology in the target language. And I am comfortable doing that at a higher level, but at lower levels, I have higher priority vocabulary I want the students to learn. So it's not something I want them to stumble over. I want them, to learn more how to say things like mother, father, friend, read, jump. Well, maybe not jump. Read, sing, eat, drink. Tim has asked, are there possibilities for partnering with Phi Beta Kappa? That's going to vary on every campus. But Phi Beta Kappa is a great source for the liberal arts, of course. And for those of you who don't know, Phi Beta Kappa is the oldest and most prestigious honor society in the country, and it's for liberal arts students. You have to have a major in the liberal arts. And one of the things I would mention to you that a lot of students don't know when they're thinking about whether or not to continue in their language study is that if your university has a chapter of Phi Beta Kappa, students will not be eligible to join Phi Beta Kappa unless they have a certain number of semesters of language that goes beyond the minimum requirement for foreign language study. So you might want to ask your Phi Beta Kappa officers what their attitude is about language learning, and then let your best students know if this is of interest for you, and I think it should be, then you should stick around for another semester or two, because that's going to help you in addition to, of course, having fabulously good grades in everything you take to get into Phi Beta Kappa. Other questions for me? As we go into the spring semester, retaining students from spring into fall will be critically important. I'm sure you're hearing this on your own campuses, especially those of us who teach less commonly taught languages. We are, all of us in our different institutions, if we are low enrolled, we are that low hanging fruit. So I encourage you to do whatever you can to make that fruit count. Question about advocating that first year Russian count toward the major. So the answer to that is going to differ on every campus, Colleen, because every campus has its own rules about what courses count towards what. When I was on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I'm pretty sure that there was a college-wide rule in the College of Letters and Science that first 2 years of language learning didn't count for any language major. And that wasn't something that we could change. And the students were just furious about it. But the challenge for us in Russian is that our first two years of language were 16 credits. So at that point, they would have been halfway through. So that was part of the challenge. So I would encourage you to talk with faculty members in the other languages at your institution. Ask your associate dean or your dean about what the rules are, and think about what kind of major you could make. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, while I was there, and Karen, I don't know if you're still on, so you can tell us how things are going now. But when I was on the faculty there, we changed our major to be, we used to have a major that was essentially a Russian language and literature major only. And then we changed the major to be a Russian major that had different tracks. And we created one track for Russian language and literature, one track for Russian civilization, which was our terminology for Russian area studies, and one track that was Russian for heritage speakers.
So we have just been asked to eliminate the tracks. So we have now just had to submit and just had approved a proposal to have one Russian major. And that gets to questions about enrollments. The reason being that in each track, there wasn't enough enrollment, but in the combined major together, enrollments were high enough that that neither tracks caused any concern. So what we tried to do in redoing the major is have it maximally flexible. There's still the issue of having only third-year Russian and up count. I'm not yet sure. I don't know yet whether that's a college-wide requirement, but it may still be because all the language majors are like that. But right, we try to have a giant, very broad cafeteria of options for students to choose from. And this gets to my other question. We've made those options at this point now all from our department, although we are all for cooperating with other departments and we want our students to double major in history, and we've lowered our numbers of credits, history or poli-sci or whatever. We have to face the reality of the numbers of student credit hours in our department being counted. And so that's the concern we have about including credits from other departments in our own majors when each one of us has to fight for every credit hour, as much as we want our students to be taking courses in history, poli-sci, double majoring, and so forth.
Yeah, so to respond to that, let me go back to what you said in the beginning, which is that when we created those tracks that you're now merging, there were 18 students majoring in Russian, and they were in the existing Russian major, which was a Lang Lit major. And when we hung out the shingle for Russian civilization and heritage speakers, we got about half a dozen majors right away for heritage speakers, and that number probably didn't change very much in my time. But in the Russian civilization major, we got over 50 within the first month. By bringing them all together, but giving flexibility, you're essentially retaining the options from the tracks. So students are just getting to choose what they want to do. The department is obviously, having to figure out how to protect its credits. And the challenge is, and here's the risk. If you allow students to count one course related to Russia from another department towards their major, will you get more students that will offset the loss of those credit hours?
That's the challenge. That's the risk.
We
don't know.
When I became dean at Hofstra, the dean who preceded me, wonderful human being who's on the faculty. He stepped back from deaning, but he's on the faculty. So he and I, very good friends, and I turn to him for help all the time. And so in my first month in what had been his office and was now mine, I said to him, Bernie, you forgot to tell me where you left the magic wand and the crystal ball. And he said, they're hidden very deep, Ben. You'll have to look for them. That's how you'll know that you're a very good dean, is when you find them. These are challenges at every institution, and whether you can count first and second year will depend on what's going on at your institution. I think that it used to be thought that people weren't doing critical thinking in first year language, that it really wasn't serious work. But I would say to you that actually our students are engaging in the grand puzzle of language, analyzing patterns and coming up to an understanding of the hierarchy of rules, and also understanding the very, very nuanced interplay between language and culture. So I would say that, if it can't count towards the major, then why is it a college course? When I was Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of New Jersey, we did a revision of our curriculum and how we assess it. And I said to the chairs, every course you teach should teach critical thinking. And if it doesn't teach critical thinking, then why are you teaching it? And one of the chair of modern languages said, but what about our first semester classes? And I said, language puzzle, culture puzzle, critical thinking. And she said, okay, I'm with you. So so I want to go back to some of the other questions now. There is, I think, going to be a trend across the country in all fields to reduce the ranks of tenure stream faculty and have more adjunct faculty in every discipline because of the budgets being shrunk, both public and private, at every institution that's not in the category of universities of infinite resources. Those would be places like Harvard and Stanford and so forth. That they're, our part-time faculty are wonderful, wonderful people. And I'm very proud of my colleague at Hofstra. But of course, it'd be great to have more full-time faculty. Tim asks if there's any information about how the forced migration to distance language and culture courses is impacting enrollments. That would be something to look at the Chronicle of Higher Education. But I will tell you that enrollments in college overall around the country are down this year. Many students are deciding to take, a lot of people who would have been freshmen this year have decided to take a deferral year and wait until they can come back and have their the college experience of their dreams rather than taking a year of Zoom classes. But I would also say that Zoom classes in language can be very successful. I mean, I can get really close up to the screen to demonstrate the proper mouth and tongue position for creating a sound in Russian that I wouldn't dream of doing in person in a classroom, with or without a mask. What is my prediction about the future of Russian programs because of the pandemic? At least 2 programs were closed in fall 2020. I predict more Russian programs will be closed. And I also think that more language programs will be closed, and we will be shocked about, some of them will be German and French. Are teachers finding that students are preferring online to in person? I think that some students prefer online, some will prefer in person, and institutions will probably wind up shifting back to be largely in person because that is the perception of what students want of a college experience. And the brick and mortar institutions, which are the places where I've always worked, institutions that are not like the University of Phoenix or DeVry, institutions that actually have buildings, which is why we call them brick and mortar, will have to go back to primarily in-person instruction because that's the only way to make the budget work. Because if they're going to compete with University of Phoenix, they have costs that they cannot support with University of Phoenix tuition. Patterning is how they begin in preschool, even before the sight words. What are the most successful courses that contribute to a general literature or culture or freshman seminar course? I think that is going to be the thing that you can make work based on your own interests and passions. Looking at the list of the skills in the Liberal Education and America's Promise program. For me, my favorite course to teach for a freshman seminar is a course I call Language, Culture, and Discrimination. It's an applied linguistics class about how language-based discrimination is a form of racism in our country and bias against immigrants. For me, that's something that I'm passionate about, and I come up with all kinds of interactive activities for the students, and we get into the community, and all of the learning tasks are based on the liberal arts skills from the LEAP program. I do believe I have a question about distance learning so that potential students can access courses that would otherwise be impossible for them to attend. I do believe that that's the case, but those who think that they can create a program that will do that are likely going to be facing very stiff competition because most universities and colleges do not allow students to transfer in credits from another university without permission to do so. So if a student were to say to me, I want to take Korean, which we don't offer, and I can take it at NYU, I would have to say, choose one of the languages we do offer and take it here, because I don't have the budgetary flexibility. If you want to take Korean, that's on you, and you can't transfer it in. So people who want to offer classes by distance and attract students from anywhere who might be able to take the class by distance, it's a difficult market to get into. And I understand that any course that you take with a great teacher will be terrific. And there's the possibility of institutions collaborating on advanced level courses when they don't have enough faculty. So for instance, in the state of Wisconsin, I was part of the founding of the Wisconsin Collaborative Language Program, which allows UW system campuses, and there are 26 of them, to share instruction in less commonly taught languages. And I think that they've now gone on to some more commonly taught languages at the upper levels, so that students at, for instance, UW Parkside could take Russian, for instance, first and second year Russian. Thank you, Karen, for confirming that it's still on. At some of those campuses, would have no access to fourth year Italian, but that's how they collaborate to make that happen. So institutions can share that way, and I understand that there's a consortium of DC universities for that as well. At this point, we've gone past 5:35, and I want to make it convenient for anybody to say goodnight. I'll continue to answer questions, but I don't want anybody to be uncomfortable about wanting to go and do something like, I don't know, have a life, eat dinner, do anything else. But I'll continue to answer questions. I wish everybody luck in the work. It's up to all of us to save our fields. So, and please take advantage of the resources at AAC&U.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks everyone for participating, for joining us.
Thank you, thank you.
And Evgeny, I'll send you the slides and you can send them out to the people who've registered.
Okay. Recording now.